Hey guys, JP Urban here, and I'll be showing you how to set up a bearded dragon and how to care for a bearded dragon.
Oh my god, Ronnie.
So, setting up a bearded dragon enclosure could be expensive or it could be affordable, I would say. And it depends on a baby or adult and how fancy you want it to be, and if you just want it to look good or if you just want it to be minimum. Now, the minimum size enclosure for an adult is 40 gallons. This is a 95 gallon. And so, to put this in perspective, a 40 gallon would end up being like right in there. He would have probably maybe double his length, and this is already almost 4 times, maybe three. And they do, well, it depends on the adult. My bearded dragon, he sometimes is chill, some days he's running around his enclosure all the time. And so the substrate is a big deal. I do use sand, but I do not feed them on the sand. That is a big difference. If you use sand and if you feed them on the sand, you have a very likely chance for your bearded dragon to get impaction. Impaction means that they can get, it's basically constipation, they will die if not treated properly. And right now, I don't have any grains in there. I just took them out right now because I'm going to feed them in a minute. And this is empty right now, and that's empty. So a lot of people do debate on water bowls or not. Now, depending on if you're keeping them in a low humidity area or a high humidity. Bearded dragons like low humidity, so I usually do not give mine a water bowl that much unless it's during the winter or something. And basically, water bowls will give out humidity, but I do give him one because he's a male, so he has those femoral pores, which he needs to release, and a loose substrate is not very good for him to release them. So water is good, and like rocks and stuff. That's why I have bricks in there too to help his claws file down because they're pretty sharp. But the substrate, you do not want to use any type of aspen snake bedding, cocoa fiber, basically any substrate that is loose and looks brown. It's that simple, unless it's brown sand, I guess, if that works for you, or the walnut shells, which actually work really well. That's what I used to raise them up on. And you basically, if you're going to use loose substrate, don't use the entire cage as loose substrate because they can, of course, eat that, and that is not good for them at all. Now, you definitely want to hide and a basking spot. Now, the basking spot, a lot of people do vary on the degrees and everything. I keep mine at about 105, and babies like it at almost 115. Adults usually like it from 90 to 105 or 100. Mine likes it hot. But you do not want to have your heat lamp, say, in the middle, because that will make the heat in the middle, and it'll have no room for a hot and cool side. Now, you want a hot and cool side, so if he does get overheated, he can go over here, and it's much cooler, and if he does get overheated, it's a very likely chance he will die. So you do not want him to get overheated, nor do you want him to be super cool for a long time. That's why he can move around just fine. He has a whole area right here, and he'll either sit there, and then about an hour later, he'll sit there for about an hour, come back, sit there, and then he'll destroy everything, and then come back and sit there, come back and sit there. He's just, yeah, I don't know. He's a weird guy. But with the food is a very important part of this. Now, yeah, I'll talk about the lights later. But food, for babies, you do not want to feed them mealworms. Now, mealworms are great for treats, but not as a total diet. Like, not their everyday meal. Mealworms are not good for them at all. They have a very low protein to fat ratio. They have more fat, more exoskeleton, which is called chitin, and that actually does have a risk of impacting your bearded dragon. And superworms are probably the best alternative if you're gonna get something else that's kind of like mealworms that's easier to breed. And superworms do not have as much chitin, and they have more protein, and of course both do not have much calcium ratio, and I'll get into that in a bit. But probably the best thing for babies is baby duvia roaches or baby hissing cockroaches dusted in calcium. Make sure they're dusted in calcium, multivitamins, and I'll show you what I use for calcium in a bit. But superworms, of course, they have to be dusted in calcium. Now there's one thing that are kind of hard to find, but they're cheap, and they don't sell in they don't sell in bulk. They sell in maybe 25 count. They're called phoenix worms, or they're also called calca worms or black soldier fly larvae. And those are packed with calcium. You do not even need to dust them, they're so rich in calcium. And they have a good protein to fat ratio, and they have no chitin. Now crickets are good, but you do have risk of, if you leave the crickets in there, they'll chew on their toes or something, just as extra protein and something, they'll just harm your bearded dragon. The crickets are not good as a total diet because they do have too much protein. Now, if you give them too much protein, they will not grow right. They will be, honestly, they might grow too fast, and then they'll have a shorter lifespan. And again, everything must be dusted except phoenix worms. And now hornworms and silkworms, those are great. Those are probably the most moisture. That's like what you want if your bearded dragon's kind of dehydrated. But you should give them as a treat. I don't feed my hornworms that much, only for treats, because they're expensive. And silkworms are more expensive, and I've not fed them because I have not gotten the chance to actually get some hornworms. Now, you do probably see the pellets here, but that is for my cockroaches. I do not, and my superworms and mealworms. I do keep mealworms only for treats and stuff, and they're cheap. But this is not for him because he doesn't like it. He's had the little crickets in the little crickets in there and stuff in the mealworms, but he just doesn't like it. He does not like the mealworms in there. He doesn't like freeze dried. But what I use to dust his food, let me get that in the light, is the Repashy Calcium Plus, and make sure you do not want to get the leopard gecko one, which I did that one time, and make sure it has not the leopard gecko. Don't get the crested gecko. This is a leopard gecko on the front. The other one is a crested gecko, and that's the crested gecko food. This is a calcium. And this has basically everything you need, plus more. It also, I remember, had like banana and had hibiscus and all that good stuff that just makes it basically tastier. And I sometimes try and use this. He ate a little bit of it. It's not, he doesn't really like dry food and stuff. I do, of course, wet it down. That's what you're supposed to do. But he just likes greens and stuff. And his favorite food, by far, is mealworms and waxworms. I mean, not mealworms, superworms. And I already have some superworms ready for him that are dusted in that calcium. And the waxworms, those are a different story. They are very high in fat. And that's what I use as treats to fatten him up, because he is a bit skinny. I know, because he went to brumation this year. But brumation is hibernation, basically. And they'll go through that probably every year or more. Not twice a year, but probably just once. But, I mean, you want to have good basking spot. You do not want to have a heat rock. Heat rocks can overheat and burn them. And that's just terrible. That's like burning something alive. And see, this is hot, but it's not too hot for I cannot handle. You know, it's good. It's black already, so I mean, it's gonna be hot. But he likes it like that. He usually just sits up here. Oh, it's over there. He usually sits up here a lot, and then he'll stay down here and just kind of cool off, and then go back up there. He's just chilling. But a lot of people do use potting soil and stuff for theirs, but they, of course, feed them on different surfaces, and they say it's good for their digging behavior and stuff. I've never seen mine dig, but that's just mine. You know, he's just different. And, I mean, yeah, I'll probably end off the video with feeding him. Just make sure you don't overfeed them, make sure you don't underfeed them. Now, overfeeding them, they can get obese, and obese can lead terrible problems. Now, if you do not, talking about the lighting. So the lighting, make sure you have probably 150 watts and for a heat lamp. And then the UV needs to be 10.0, like the bulb, and it needs to be UVA and UVB. Now, if they do not get UVB, they'll have metabolic bone disease, and they'll be really weird looking. Their eyes will be huge. Their tails will probably be bent. They'll probably have a hump in their back, and they'll just be really misshapen and stuff, and that can kill them sometimes. And that's the same thing if you don't give them calcium. The same thing will happen. That's why it's very important whenever you're raising them up as babies to give them calcium. He may not want to eat right now, but I'll probably feed him in a bit because, oh, there we go. And yeah, I'll feed him from this because this has, if he's going to ingest something, it's going to be calcium powder, so that's perfectly fine. But he likes them. So, I mean, yeah, that's basically it. I'll feed him in a bit. So, yeah. Last thing, bearded dragons, it depends on the morph you get, and there's different morphs, and I'll go over that later. But this is a 100% standard bearded dragon. He is just fully standard, no hypo, no translucent, no scale morphs like Dunner or Microscale or Leatherback. He's just a normal bearded dragon. He has a normal pattern, wild type basically, but he's not imported or anything. He's from a breeder. But I mean, he is fine, and I mean, I'd rather have a healthy bearded dragon than a cool one that looks bad. But yeah, there's a ton of different morphs that you can get that are super expensive. Now, the ones at Petco and stuff, those are the ones you want to stay away from. Any animal from Petco, except maybe a fish. I don't really get into fish stuff. I don't really know that. Y'all can comment. I don't know. But Petco reptiles, they're just not kept right, and the babies are kept on sand. Now, make sure you do not keep babies on loose substrate. Babies on loose substrate is just waiting for a problem to happen because the sand grains are bigger in their intestines and stuff. You want to keep babies even as plain on paper towels or a mat. I used a rock mat for him, and he is perfectly fine. He's a little skinny, of course, but like he still has a belly. That's fine. His tail's nice and thick. He's got the little cheeks. I mean, he is fine. But I'm still trying to beef him up a little bit before it becomes winter again. But I mean, yeah, that's basically it. I mean, you can have fake plants in there. Just try not to have live ones because he'll eat them. But he knows that one's not food because it doesn't smell at all. But that's basically it. So, bye.